What's up, friends? Welcome to the Pool Guides podcast. I'm Cristian with River Pools. My mission here is pretty simple. I go out into the industry and I find experienced, real world pros who can help bring clarity to your pool buying journey. I'm bringing you people who live this stuff every day so that they can share their knowledge in hopes that it'll help you make confident decisions for the project you're planning in your backyard. Today's guide is Jason Hughes. He's a longtime builder and educator, and he's one of the most respected voices in the in-ground pool industry, particularly in the fiberglass space. Today, we're tackling one of the most misunderstood parts of the pool buying experience. How long does it take to actually have a pool installed? And what really controls that timeline? You're going to want to stick around for this one because I'm going to ask Jason about an install he once managed that took 8 hours and 15 minutes. Yes, 8 hours and 15 minutes from start to finish, soup to nuts, end to end, whatever phrase you want to use. That install was fast. It's a wild story. You're going to want to hear it, but you're also going to want to hear why you should never expect that for your backyard. The lesson in that story, that's what matters today. Before we get into today's topic, let me quickly explain why Jason is the guide of choice for today. He's been on thousands of job sites in his 20 years of experience. His specialty is in fiberglass pools, and he is now an industry course instructor for fiberglass pool installation, alongside course instructors for vinyl liner installation and concrete pool construction. So let's start with the big question. Does the speed of install really matter as much as people think? We're talking about
Man, let's dive in.
speed of install, okay? And there are a variety of ways to discuss this. It is a big factor to some when they decide what type of pool they want. It is not the sole factor. It should not be the sole factor in my opinion, but it should play a part, right? So let's talk about why installation time matters and how a timeline might even affect your backyard access, your summertime plans. Just generally, why does the speed of installation matter regardless of the pool type? What should you consider?
It's a great question. So why does it matter? I think it matters because I think that there's some folks out there who will make their buying decision based on an emotional basis, based on how quickly they can get the pool finished. Maybe there's a big pool party or a wedding or something going on, and they just got to have this pool in, and maybe that's the basis for their decision. And that might be the best thing for them. And then there's also a group of people who really aren't focused on it at all and are very surprised as the process unfolds. And it directly impacts a couple things. Number one, their experience as this is happening and unfolding. Number two, their perception of their contractor who they're working with. And it can leave a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to the pool. So I think that's, in a nutshell, Cristian, why this is an important conversation.
Yeah. So how might installation time, length of that period of time, um, impact the life of the buyer, right? So not just let's talk time of year, let's talk the length of the install itself. Let's just sort of spin this a few ways, things the homeowner might want to consider. And just in general, how might the installation and the length of that time impact your life?
In short, the length of time it takes to have the pool built will not impact your life long term. I think that's an important point. What will impact long term will be the quality of the installation, the quality of the products, and the company that you worked with, and whether they're willing to stand behind their product in a warranty situation or not. Those are really the long term situations. I think a lot of times, especially depending on the time of year, people do become very emotionally driven, though, and I think where it can impact, when it comes to time frame, where it can have a very negative impact is in a situation where a customer bases the decision on what contractor to use on who they can get it from first. We have
Hmm.
seen that time and time again, that someone will kind of roll the dice with a company, not really follow their instincts or their gut, or reviews, just because they just say, hey, you know what, they can get it done faster. What can go wrong? That has proved to be proved not to be a great decision in a lot of cases for people. So I think that's an area that people should think about, especially if they're like really focusing on, hey, I want to have this pool party in July or whatever.
Well, there's a big difference between the contractor who can get to me first and then the one who could actually complete the project in the most efficient way,
Mm.
right?
That is a good point. Yeah, that's a great point. Go online, go to the social media groups, read all the complaints that people are sharing. And one that you're going to see pretty regularly is they promised me a start date. It was in April. They came and they dug a hole and they left. It's August. We've missed our summer.
Right. I mean, I think there's a whole nother episode around selecting the right builder for you um, that we should do at some point. So, bottom line, speed matters, but it should not be the thing that drives your entire decision. Once you zoom out, the real timeline killer probably is not the type of pool you choose. Nope, it's going to be the scope of work. The features, the walls, the patios, all the things that make up the outdoor living space around the pool. Those are the elements that can quietly add weeks to the timeline of your project. Let's unpack that.
It can't be overstated how much the scope of work can impact the timeline. What I mean by scope of work is the amount of aspects to the project. For example, we've so far we've just talked about kind of basic projects, timeline on basic projects. The pool's in, there's a little bit of patio, but there's things that can completely blow that right out of the water. Like for example, big retaining walls, a lot of site work, elevated features, pool structures, pool houses. Forget about it. That's a whole nother conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so the scope of work that's going on with that project is probably the single biggest factor, even bigger than the pool type. So that needs to be considered. I mean, even things like an automatic pool cover, right, will add a week or two to the overall process for any type of pool.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, retaining walls, uh, if there are elevated features, if there's tiers in the patio, you have a step up to an elevated patio, custom water features, all these things are game changers. So what we've seen is, at least with our customers over the years, is we will say something like it will take us 2 or 3 days to get your pool shell in. Based on your scope of work, we're anticipating this taking 2.5 to 3 months, which is not uncommon because our
Right.
complexity of jobs is getting bigger. What that individual heard was 3 days. So that's what they took away from that comment. So it's important to communicate with the pool builder on how the scope of work will impact this.
Mm-hmm.
And, as contractors, we probably want to be very liberal with the amount of time that expectations that we set, right? So,
Yeah.
or conservative actually. So, depending on the perspective. So if we see, 2 months worth of work, we probably want to just say three months. But that's an important part of the conversation, Cristian, is the scope of the
Yeah.
work.
Well, it would really
Um,
it would level the playing field. See, if you're just talking dig to water, fiberglass is fastest. But then when you account for scope of work after that, all the finishes, all the other things that have to be in place, it really almost makes the product you choose irrelevant in terms of time. And now that you have something completely different, now it's a matter of, did I choose the right product for me, like based on other factors? Because the speed of install now doesn't matter because there's so much scope that needs to be dealt with afterward. Speed of install
yeah.
becomes
So
a
let's
moot
take
point.
a complex fiberglass pool project might take 2.5 months.
Hmm.
The average I would say is probably somewhere between 6 and like 6 weeks and 2.5 months would be average. But if you
Hmm.
tack on another 6 weeks to that or 2 months with a concrete pool, that actually is a factor. That is where that fatigue is coming in at that
Hmm.
couple
Right.
month mark. And you push out another month or two by that, it actually does make a little bit of difference. I wouldn't base my decision on it, but it does make a difference.
Yeah, it plays a factor, right? It plays a
It
role.
does.
So yeah, the scope of the project can really have an impact on the timeline, probably more so than the type of pool you choose. Now let's take a look at vinyl liner pools specifically, and what an efficient job site might look like in terms of timeline, and what can make them drag on for months. Let's dig into it. So let's talk vinyl liner pools. A little bit about the process and focusing on the timeline impact relative to the process for putting a vinyl liner pool in. And for the sake of this conversation, we'll focus on in-ground vinyl liner pools. There are above ground products, completely different price category. They typically can go in a day, full of water, in and out. But for the sake of this conversation, how long might it typically take to put a vinyl liner pool in?
Yeah, usually just going to say 4 to 8 weeks. Again, going back to basic projects, 4 to 8 weeks. What makes up that time frame is an excavation that happens. Then there's wall panels that are basically set in place. That's what creates the perimeter walls of the pool. They're
Okay.
actually plastic or metal panels that are bolted together. They're usually about 42 inches tall. You bolt those together. If you have steps that are integrated into that wall system, you would kind of bolt those in or install them at that time. And, so once they're set, you need to get an inspection typically. And then you would pour a concrete around the base of the outside of those wall panels. They would call that the footer. And that's what locks those panels in place. So from there, the plumbing is installed. That can be installed before or after the concrete. And then the walls could be backfilled with dirt or stone at that time. That could also happen after the fact, but typically installers will go ahead and backfill those walls. They'll go ahead and put the coping on the pool around the outside. Usually do the patio at this time, and then come back and do the base and the bottom of the pool, which could be vermiculite, which is a cement product mixed with vermiculite, which is kind of the kind of shiny stuff you see if you buy potting soil. That's vermiculite. So they mix that with cement, or you can use sand and cement, and you trowel that on the exposed earth everywhere that's kind of lower than those wall panels. Then you set the liner in place. So some installers will set the liner and install the liner like the very last thing. Others will go ahead and do it before the patio is poured. But either way, just to give you a time frame breakdown, excavation is usually a day. Setting the wall panels is usually a day. Day of inspection, day of pouring the concrete collar around the outside. By that point, you could be at day 3 or 4. And then from there, you're either going to backfill the walls, do patio and do the liner, or go the other way that we talked about. Total time frame adding up to that 4 to 8 weeks usually.
Yeah. Okay. I've heard of vinyl projects lasting a lot longer. When these times really get dragged out, it seems to be usually tied to just an inefficient contractor, an inefficient builder. They don't have enough people on site. They don't have all the parts or pieces there. The operation is not together, and logistically they're not mapped out. And I think that's typically what would make a vinyl liner pool drag on, you know, months and months and months. And I've
Yeah.
heard of it happening, but I think it's the quality of the builder, not necessarily relative to the product itself.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think there's one instance with a vinyl liner pool that, where you have some extra time that's going to have to be neat. It's going to be part of the process. Let's say it's a custom pool with integrated, vinyl oversteps, meaning like there's a step or a ledge where the vinyl covers those features in the pool as opposed to having like plastic steps on the outside.
Hmm.
Those liners need to be custom measured and ordered. So there's a process for that too. That means basically the pool structure needs to be built, then it's measured, then it's ordered, then you've got the time frame from the liner manufacturer to make it and ship it.
Yeah.
So that could take an extra few weeks for sure, and add that onto the process. But I take your point, Christian. I think it's a great point when it comes to efficiency with contractors. I think one of the things that anyone who's having a pool built should expect is that there will be days that will go by, and they're going to be like great days where the sun might be shining. I mean, these are like the toughest days, right? So let's just say it's June and it's touching 90 degrees and everybody's ready to swim and nobody's there working.
Right.
The truth
Why are
is
they not
that's gonna
here?
right. Right. So naturally we're what as a consumer, we're thinking our contractor, we think all kinds of stuff. They don't have their stuff together, or they're putting other customers in front of me. My point here is that I think everyone should expect that. That's the reality of building a pool. We want, as contractors, we want to minimize that as important. And it doesn't mean that you are not as important as a customer. It just means there's things that happen that are outside of our control, which I want to talk about a little bit later, but it could be weather driven. It could be inspection related. There's all these other factors that come up, but those are tough days. But if you're having a pool built, you should expect those days, and just, hopefully your pool builder will be communicating with you and let you know why, if he's not coming, and why.
Right, right. And really, that's not just relative to pool building. That's any construction project. You're going to have moments when you think, "Why is my guy not here? This is the perfect opportunity to get a lot accomplished." And
So
there are
true.
just there's just things that happen in construction,
It's
and have
true.
that
But
conversation with your builder ahead of time.
yeah, it's true. There's so much emotion tied up in getting a pool finished.
All right, when a crew is rock solid, vinyl liner pools can run very smoothly. Now let's talk about fiberglass pools, known as the fast ones. How fast are they, really? And what can slow them down? Let's talk about fiberglass pool, that process and that install timeline, how long it takes to dig to swim.
Yeah. So the concept for installing a pool is very simple. Dig a hole, put some stone in the bottom, set the pool in the hole, fill it with water, and backfill around the outside with stone. Like in it, and there are certainly some tricks and some nuances to that, and there's lots of ways that could go wrong, but that really is the basic process, and it's actually pretty fast. So just think about it. You've got a shell that's manufactured in a manufacturing facility. It just rolls in, and there it is. There's the pool shell. It's already there for you. So total process time frame would be 3 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks on a fiberglass, very basic fiberglass pool install. What would make that time up would be digging a hole, which could be half a day to a day. Setting the shell in the hole, you gotta put some stone down on the bottom for the shell to sit on. And we'll talk about installation practices in another another episode,
Yeah,
Christian. I'm
that's a
excited about that one,
dedicated
but
episode.
absolutely. But set the pool down, get it level, backfill around the outside. On average, a fiberglass pool is installed on average in a lot of situations. The shell will be in the ground, full of water. All the plumbing will be done in 2 or 3 days, with a team of 2, 3, maybe 4 people. There's certainly instances where it will take 4 or 5 days, especially with extensive permits, or inspections. We're gonna talk about that, or really tight access backyards, or if you hit rock as you're digging, water, groundwater, things like that. On average, the shell's in the ground though in 2, 3, maybe 4 days. From
Hmm.
there, the process is you're really starting on coping work, patio work, electrical work, and that's usually can be wrapped up in another few weeks. So, and it's the fastest fiberglass install might happen in 2 weeks. That would be like lightning speed. The average for a basic project might be 6 or 8 weeks. If the weather's poor, we're going to talk about the time of year. It could absolutely push you a whole month, and could be to 3 weeks or 3 months rather. So
Hmm.
yeah, but that's an overview of fiberglass.
Yeah, cool. And what's a little bit different about fiberglass, because it's brought as a one-piece unit, you take concrete and vinyl liner; those structures are completely built, and then you're gonna get plaster, and with the vinyl, you're gonna get the liner itself. But the whole thing is in place. Then it's filled with water. With fiberglass, you have to backfill and fill with water at the same time. So the process for filling it with water for the first time, that's going to be a little bit different. I think it plays into the speed of install um, because it has to happen at the same time. You're not waiting for something else.
Yeah. So fiberglass.
So fiberglass pools go in the ground fast, but the finishes around them add weeks to the project. Concrete, though, that's a different animal. Custom shapes, custom designs, and there's a 28-day concrete curing window that no one can escape. Let's talk about how that can affect the timeline for concrete pools.
So we'll start with the time frame. We'll kind of break it down as to why on very 30,000 foot, viewpoint. So concrete pool, I think someone could expect somewhere between 2.5 to 4 months for a basic project. The process is basically dig a hole, tie steel rebar, the reinforcing rebar steel down in the hole, do plumbing, and shoot the shell. And, basically then you're going to do tile around the water line, coping on
Real
top.
quickly, what do you mean by shoot the shell?
Yeah, sorry. So a concrete pool is built a couple different ways. The most common is either what's called gunite, which is pneumatically applied concrete. It's actually compressed air shoots cement, sand, water onto the actual shell structure itself. It's very
Okay.
high PSI, very high impact rate, very strong. And the other version of that is shotcrete, which is where you bring a ready mix truck in, you dump concrete into a hopper, and then you blow the concrete on. Both of those two processes are essentially they're two ways to build a concrete pool.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about there.
But you're literally shooting concrete in one form or the other to form the floor and the walls in whatever shape and design you want.
Yeah,
You're shooting it
yeah, it's a
at the
cool
rebar
process.
skeleton, basically.
Yeah, yeah, you're shooting, and it needs to be pretty precise. So there needs to be a trained nozzleman, and that person is kind of shooting around the rebar.
Hmm.
And then as he's shooting the shell, there's other people that are shaping
There you go.
the contours of the shell to make sure it's dimensionally right.
Got it. Okay. All right.
That
Carry on. So
that
we.
process in itself is a day usually, So that process in itself doesn't take that long. So that's done. Then waterline tile is added. Coping, which is the perimeter patio material right around the edge, is done. Then you have to kind of wait from the time the shell is installed or shot until you apply the finish, which is usually a plaster, some form of a plaster
Hmm.
finish. You really should wait about 28 days for that shell to cure.
Right.
So there's some there's some aspects of this that are kind of baked in delays when it comes to some of these pool types. That's one example for a concrete pool. So plaster surface goes in, water is filled immediately. This is usually after a lot of the patio work can even be done. And, that whole process usually takes about 2.5 to 4 months.
Okay. So let's take the concrete pool. Let's break this into chunks. Um, let's talk a high speed concrete builder. Okay. I mean, these guys are just they're plugging along. They've got subs or they've got in house talent, and they know how to get it done. And by the way, I wouldn't judge a pool builder or a pool company based on whether they use subs or not, but rather more on do they have references that indicate they can get the job done and get it done efficiently at a price that you is acceptable to you as the homeowner. So
Agree.
um, let's say that this concrete pool builder is very efficient, very reputable, just very good at their craft. How long might it take, for or would be reasonable for like a 15 by 30-foot pool, dig the hole, build the rebar structure. How long will that process take?
Yeah, dig the hole is probably a day. Tie the rebar and do the plumbing is probably 2 days.
Okay.
And then there are inspections throughout that process. There needs to be
Right.
inspections on the steel,
Hmm.
inspections on the plumbing, and then at that point, ready to shoot the shell. That process can take a day. So by
Right.
this point in the process, if somebody's really rocking and rolling, it could be a week or two.
Yeah.
When they're ready to shoot the shell, and then from that point, we start kind of the 28-day countdown to plaster. While
Right.
that's going on, waterline tiles installed, which you need on
Hmm.
every concrete pool, and then the coping is installed
Hmm.
around the outside. Yeah, and then at that 28-day mark, there can be other steps too, like waterproofing on the inside of the shell, but before plaster,
Hmm.
and the equipment pad, electrical work, all these things are being done. The equipment pad meaning the pump and filter system, that can be being done. So, then the plaster is applied, and that is basically done in a day. And as soon as that starts to cure, you want to fill it, you want to brush it, for a
It has to
week.
cure underwater.
You really need. There's a startup process that needs to be followed closely, and that's over a period of time. And then basically whatever's left to be done, cleaning up the yard, maybe adding water features, any other accessory features will happen, and then
Hmm.
you're done. And at that point, if somebody's really rolling, it could be Could be 2 months, 2.5 months. I'm sure there's people that probably do it faster than that. We're talking averages.
There's coordination things in there. There might be, well, not might. I think everybody shall. So concrete gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to design, but curing time is non-negotiable and it can set the pace for your project in many instances. Now let's talk about timing, because when you build your pool is just as important as the pool you choose to build. Weather windows, backlogs, calendars, this is where swim season is won or lost.
You mentioned time of year also.
Yeah, time of year, because and what I'm thinking in my head is the builder's backlog, and there's a natural thought. It totally makes sense that when the temperatures cool off, people are like, well, they stop thinking about having a pool installed. They don't really think about it again until springtime arrives. They're like, man, it would be great. Let's get that pool installed now. Summer's coming. But you talked about the builder's backlog. There's time of year. Concrete has to be poured. Talk us through
Yes.
what things we should be thinking about to help us make the best decision for us.
Yeah, it's huge. Time of year. Well, it depends on where you live. So if you live if you live in an area where there's different seasons and you actually have a winter, then what can happen is pool builders will continue to install, in our case, fiberglass pool shells all through the winter. Like in Virginia, we never stop. We never slow down unless on that given day it's too wet. It's usually not too cold. So we will continue to install shells, but we cannot pour concrete. So the shells go in, and then once it starts to warm up in the spring, now our concrete crews are really trying to play catch up. So if we install your pool in, let's just say, December, then there's a good chance your pool, depending on the weather, it could sit for longer than it would have sat before. So that can extend the time frame. Now that's not unique to any type of pool, any type of contractor. That is strictly time of year based on the weather. It doesn't matter what kind of pool it is. So, and you compare that. So that's a scenario we're starting in December, January. Well, let's if you start in, let's say you start in June. Well, then you've got 2 months of usually pretty good weather ahead of you, and all the backlog with the contractors from over the wintertime have caught up. So the average time can fluctuate based on the time of year. So your fastest install might start in summer or fall, and then once you start to get really bad weather during the winter time, then it slows down again.
Right.
So that's a big factor.
But if you were planning your project around wanting to swim when the weather breaks, late spring, it's really when the outside temperature is warm enough to feel like I want to take a refreshing swim. Let's back up. When should I actually start to think about I need to sign that contract by when on the calendar so that I can swim a full summer for the first time?
Yeah, great question. By the way, I wouldn't, based on the fact that there's kind of some baked in delays for certain times of year, I wouldn't not buying a pool there, because this could be really in your favor. To your point here, Cristian, where let's say if a contractor does start in December, January, February timeframe, then the pool's probably going to be ready to swim by spring. So even though there's some delays, the pool shell's in, the process has already started. So the best time, it depends on the pool contractor's backlog. Let's just say it's 3 months, for example. Then you probably want to be trying to start before April, if you want to, or even March, with a fiberglass pool, if you want to swim that season. Now, so in the start time and all that is a big factor for a lot of folks, as we mentioned.
Yeah. And we usually see a lot of interest coming out of Christmas, going into the new year. People tend to forget about it when it's cold outside for the northern climates during the month of February. And then with that first warm day of March, like the first sign of warmer weather in March is when the phone will start ringing, the doors will open, people start calling. And so I think, to your point, getting started much earlier is going to be advantageous to you and to your family.
Absolutely. In one word of caution would be, and buying behaviors change and evolve, and they go through cycles. What we've seen the past few years is that once folks realize that they're not going to swim that summer, they usually kind of fall off the radar and they go about their lives, and they all tend to come back at the same time, which is after school starts in September or in October. So everybody's kind of coming back in October for the most part. And then so what ends up happening is then basically what somebody's doing is they're rolling the dice on whether or not they'll be able to swim the next year, because the backlog might go from 3 months to 7 months over the course of 4 weeks. So
Interesting.
if you're thinking about buying and you know you're not going to swim that year, we would just advise folks to go ahead and don't wait until, the fall to talk about the next year.
Yeah.
I would just say don't wait. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to have
When
to,
you make the decision, go for it.
yeah. And prices aren't going to go down if you wait, they
Right.
could go up. Backlog is certainly going to be pushed out farther.
Right.
And it's probably in your best interest to go ahead and get serious about it, make all those decisions, then you got it done. You don't have to stress over it.
Dude, this is good stuff. So the earlier you start, the more swim season you're going to have. That's the big takeaway. And speaking of timelines, there was that one time Jason installed a pool start to finish in 8 hours and 15 minutes. Let's talk about how he was able to pull that off and what it does not mean for your backyard. And I forgot to bring up something really cool. I mean, we talked about how long these things take to install. We talked about fiberglass, um, everything being perfect. Fiberglass has the fastest potential. But you neglected to tell us about this 8 hour and 15-minute install you did at one point in your career. You put a pool in the ground in 8 hours and 15 minutes, like start
No,
to
we don't like
finish.
we don't like to talk about that, Christian. You weren't supposed to bring that up today. No, this was a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know how many years ago this was, at least 10, maybe 15 years ago.
I'm actually going to show a clip of that here during this podcast, just so people see it, and I hope they laugh because this was like early YouTube days, and
Oh yeah.
so the footage is definitely with a handheld camcorder, probably
Oh
on
yeah. I
tape. I
mean,
have
yeah,
no
this was
idea.
this was Jason's, best editing. This was the best video I ever did. This will give you an idea of how how
Yeah,
good I was if this
yeah,
was my best. We wanted to see how fast we could install a fiberglass pool and the patio. I think we started at 7:30 a.m. and by 3:30 p.m. that day, there was concrete around the pool. It was up and running, and it was basically done. we
that
we
is
had we aligned with our local with the county, with the inspector. He was kind of standing there ready. We had all
yeah,
of our teams lined up. Yeah, it was just, it was one of those days where we did it as something fun to do back then. But it did show what the potential is, for if somebody really were
yeah.
to, best case scenario. But
Holy
okay, so here's the
smokes!
risk with that. I gotta say, folks hear that, and then you know what I'm getting ready to say. That's not realistic. It's not going to happen.
No,
It's not going to happen in your backyard. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't
there's just
matter. Yeah, it's
that's
not going to
literally
go that way.
like overnight home makeover show type stuff because
Yeah, exactly.
logistically, so
It
much
was a
has to be
fun marketing
coordinated.
event. Yes, it was very
Yeah.
much a home makeover style day. Yep,
And there have been other pool builders who have done, things like that. But still, I mean, to show up, 8 hours and 15 minutes, put this thing in the ground. Pool install talent was definitely on hand. Anyway, it was a cool thing. I had it in my notes to bring up, and I wanted to do that.
that's
Um,
funny. Thank you.
yeah, buddy. Okay, so now let's talk about some other things that people should consider with their timeline. You mentioned earlier in the show birthday parties twice. Should people plan to have a pool installed and ready in time for a birthday party? There are definitely some warnings there. And so, what would you say to a homeowner if they said, "Yeah, I want to have it installed in time for my daughter's 8th birthday"? What would you say?
Yeah, I would say, um, if you can do that if you want to. It might, if you want to protect your sanity, the best thing would probably be to not do that.
Hmm.
There's And I mean, I'm not a superstitious person, but like pool parties are bad luck. You know, when somebody plans a pool party, like it's like I don't know what it is, but there's something's going to happen. It's gonna rain. The inspection's not going to go through. Something's going to happen that's going to prevent it from not happening. So has it happened in the past? Of course. Does it happen all the time? Of course. I would not advise it. I would, plan like it's not going to happen,
Right.
some kind of way.
I think that's a warning to all parents. Don't promise the pool party. Don't promise the kid the pool party.
Don't send
Uh,
the invitation, man. Just don't do
don't
it.
send it. Plan something different. And if it happens, then you make a last minute bonus change for everybody. Yeah.
Exactly.
And same for 4th of July. Same for all the other things. Like,
It's every holiday. Yeah, I mean, I'm
yeah,
the same way. I'm the
don't,
same
don't,
exact.
don't plan the project timeline around throwing a big bash in the pool. Wait for it to be done, then invite everybody. So yeah, the 8-hour install was a lot of fun. A bit of a stunt, and you should not expect it for your backyard. In real life, the slowest part of a project can actually occur before the dig begins. Permitting, engineering requirements, HOA requirements, access plans. Let's look at the waiting phase and how we can make many feel anxious. Now let's talk universally. We've been talking dig to swim here. So equipment shows up, they start digging, and to the point of water filling. Those were the timelines we talked already. But let's back up because planning the pool, the project itself, takes some time. Once you sign the dotted line, what happens between that point, signing the contract, and equipment showing up? And this is, again, I think, in my view, this is pretty universal for no matter what type of pool you get. But how long of a period is that typically? What has to happen in between those 2 points, and what might homeowners expect?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. So we would call that the waiting phase. So when
Painful.
yeah, and it definitely can be. So somebody makes the decision, they sign on the dotted line with a pool contractor, they give them a deposit, and then it's like the waiting begins to start. So what happens during that phase, and how long does it take? The biggest challenges are the backlog for the contractor. Is probably the single biggest thing that can impact it. And then right along with that is the amount of time it takes to satisfy the needs of the locality or municipality. So getting a permit, meeting their requirements for anything else they might ask for. So like a grading plan, for example, or special engineering, or ways to capture and deal with stormwater. The amount of impervious cover you're going to have in the backyard, which could require surveying and special engineering in some cases. So what's neat about this, Cristian, is that you might, like in Virginia, I think we work in 40 counties, 40 different counties throughout the state. And man, there's huge differences. In some counties, we can walk in the door on a Tuesday morning and walk out the door in an hour with a building permit, and we're ready to roll. In other areas, it will take 6 to 9 months to obtain what we need to start the project.
Wow, 6 to
So
9 months.
6 to 9 months, absolutely. And some of that is the county itself. Some of it is third party requirements, such as getting grading plans. You'd have to go and secure an engineer. Then you have to find the company who's going to install whatever mitigation requirements are spec'd by the engineer. All those things need to be, reviewed and approved by the customer, implemented into our plan. And so, yeah, I mean, it can really make a big difference. So backlog from a pool contractor. And I would say, what's an average backlog? Well, we're through the COVID era now, and most contractors are backed up somewhere between 3 and 9 months, I would say,
Yeah,
on
it seems
average.
about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of that depends on the time of year and other things that come and go. But yeah, 3 to 9 months on average. And the average time to get a permit really does swing back and forth, and it depends on where you are regionally in the country too. But on average, that could be something like 3 to 12 weeks to get a permit.
Yeah. Are there, if you're closer to water, you're going to have special permits you likely have to have. I know that's true in Virginia. Like the closer you are to rivers, Chesapeake Bay, you've got permitting you got to deal with. If you're in a city, you definitely are going to have to deal with some stormwater mitigation plans. What are some other special permits that might require time and or more resources for homeowners to plan into their, incorporate into their project?
We're seeing more and more requirements for soil, like a geotechnical engineer to do a soil test to make sure the soil can bear the load of the pool.
Okay.
We're starting to see that some. That's a factor. It's not usually incredibly expensive or doesn't really incorporate too many delays. Sometimes you have to go to VDOT and give VDOT get a bond with VDOT where you're going to give VDOT, meaning Virginia Department of Transportation or whatever state you're in, that
Right.
state
Your
might
DOT.
require that you give them $5,000, for example, in case you crush the curb on the side of the road. Or you might have to have special permits to block a road during the construction process. And I say I don't necessarily mean that it's the homeowner doing this. Maybe it's the contractor, but these are more complexities, associations, and they're usually okay. But sometimes they can require a lot. So that's another potential snag there as well. So sometimes you might have your pool build might require the use of your neighbor's property to get to the backyard. And that is a very sensitive situation. So maybe you have to get permission from your neighbors and maybe you get that in writing, or maybe you have to cross public space and you have to get permission from the locality. So these are some other things that we see pop up.
Yeah, yeah. But again, universally, these are all things that could pop up regardless of the pool type you get. So, 3 to 6 weeks to tackle all this. Is that what you said? 3 to 6?
Yeah.
Typically outside of
some of these
the
things are going
backlog.
to be, some of these things would be a little bit longer. And I think where folks can get into trouble is, the contract is signed, the deposit from the homeowner is placed, and then nothing happens for 8 weeks. And then we're 4 weeks before we're supposed to start, and then the contractor decides to go ahead and get the permit. That is inviting big challenges. The process on the contractor's part is pretty important here, that they just stay on the ball and that they, the goal is to just go ahead and secure all that stuff as soon as possible. It sounds easy in theory. In practice, it can be a little more difficult because everybody's stretched really thin, but that's what everyone should strive to do.
So those early weeks of silence after you sign the dotted line, that's when your pool builder should be doing a lot of heavy lifting. Once you understand that, the rest of your project can be far more predictable. You'll be able to manage your expectations much, much easier. Here's the key takeaway. Pick the pool that you'll enjoy for the next 10 plus years, not how fast you'll swim the first year. Scope adds weeks to the timeline, permits add friction, weather completely unpredictable. With smart planning and choosing a good builder, you're going to be enjoying that backyard long after the timeline of construction is forgotten. I'm Cristian with River Pools. This is the Pool Guides Podcast. We'll see you on a future episode.